Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 14th of January and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. This is episode 3, season 9 of Motor Trade Radio. Once again, we've gathered together this week's big car retailing stories across the franchised and independent sectors for you to enjoy all in one place, on demand, on your podcast feed.
Well, we'd better do some shout outs because that might actually explain the intro that we've just done there, Curtis.
Yeah, well, it's a big shout out to Steve Whitten, who I actually met for the first time this week. Now, you and I have been talking to Steve a lot over recent weeks about doing some voiceovers for us, and they've landed, haven't they?
They have, and you know, I had the pleasure of meeting Steve after so long again in the virtual space, but I met him down at AM Live recently. We haven't all three got together yet. We've met each other independently, but anyway, that will come. But no, you're right. I think he used to do voiceovers, and I think he really enjoyed doing this for us. So you know, I think obviously he does the Men-Able Moments, which is obviously, if you stay tuned, you'll be listening to his Men-Able Moments this week as well. But yeah, I think he did really enjoy it. But you know, fantastic, and really appreciate for the work that Steve's put into this one.
Yeah, and meeting up with him, I was reminded that Steve was a professional broadcaster at one stage. And, you know, if you are listening today and you need a voiceover artist, then do get in touch with Steve, because he does actually really enjoy doing that. And as I said to him, he's got a great radio face. So
yes.
And also, he's still doing management training, because it was interesting talking to him, because I kind of associate him purely with Men-Able now, but that's only part of what he does. He's still doing management training for dealers, for dealer groups. So again, you know, if you do need that support, then do get in touch with him.
Yeah, so again, yeah, so fantastic, and a big shout out, Steve, for the work you did there, and thank you very much for that. Another shout out this week, if you have missed it, it was published on Thursday morning of this week, the first midweek interview of 2023, and one that we sort of eagerly wanted to do because it was with Robert Forrester, who you'll know as the CEO of Virtue Motor Group. And, you know, talking to Robert there is, you know, talking through the recent acquisition of the Helston Group that's been obviously hitting the headlines, and we've talked about on a regular basis through the Saturday show on the podcast, but also his view on lookout on 2023. And it was a little gem of an interview, that one, wasn't it, Curtis?
It was. What a great way to start the year. We will be running more regular weekday interviews over the course of the coming months, and Robert was you know, certainly set the bar high for that. It was a fascinating interview. He was very open about the whole acquisition process, and we will actually include an extract of that in just a few minutes.
Yeah, but do tune into the full interview. So you know, that should be on your podcast feed from Thursday of this week. And we must also give a shout out to another friend of the show, which is John Smythe from Swansway Group, who put a little note and thanked us on the reference to RRG and
Yes.
where RRG came from, which was Radcliffe Road Garages. But he actually got into a little bit of a chatter there because, you know, I, as you know from the last week's show, I knew RRG in the early days. I also remember Elton Garages in the early days, and I knew obviously the Smythe family's involvement with that group, and we were having a little chat there in terms of it, and he posted a picture with him and his brothers there, and I think his sister might have been there as well, with the dad outside their first garage, and a fascinating history there.
And it's them as young children, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, with the dad in the early days, and actually, if you go onto RRG's website, and look at the history of RRG, I think the same picture is on there with that before Marubeni purchased RRG later on. So fascinating little chat there with John, and thanks for jumping on that one. It was great to have that chat, John.
I did actually notice, Phil, last week when we were doing that story that you spelt out Radcliffe Road Garage, and I thought, that's local knowledge, isn't it?
It certainly is, yeah. I knew that area inside out, so, but yeah, definitely. And also, we've got the AM Awards coming up, so a little reminder to get your entries in for the AM. The deadline is the 24th of February, so about 6 weeks off. The ceremony on the 11th of May at London Park Plaza. And I know someone that might be able to help you with that if you do need some help getting your entries in.
Yeah, I did a shout out last week, and many thanks for everyone who got in touch with me. I'll say it again, if you do need help in pulling your entries together, because I know how time stretched you guys are, and just sitting down, getting your head around entries for awards can be very time consuming. So if you do need assistance with that process, then do get in touch with me. I'm on LinkedIn and on Twitter, so just get hold of me there.
And as always, we'll be sharing the newsletter through your LinkedIn feed. If you haven't signed up for that, then do head over to the Motor Trade Radio LinkedIn page, and you can subscribe to the newsletter. And what we'll do with that is every Sunday evening or Monday morning, we'll share the headlines with the URL links to the headlines that we've talked about this week, again with another link to the show as well, and any other interesting references we can put on there. So if you haven't subscribed to that, then please do subscribe to that.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
Now, before we look at this week's headlines, here's an extract from that exclusive podcast interview we did earlier in the week with Virtue Motors' Robert Forrester.
Start to talk about, obviously, the Helston Garages Group acquisition, which, correct me if I'm wrong, was 28 outlets across 21 locations, subsequently 8 brands in the southwest. And does that now take you making the biggest dealer group acquisition of the year? I don't think there's last year anything bigger, was there, Robert?
Well, with Dash out of action, no.
We better not talk about that, Dash. It's be due up soon, won't it? So, I mean, do you want to talk us through a little bit about it? I mean, obviously, it hit the headlines. It hit the headlines for quite a while because obviously there's quite a few moving parts in the whole deal of the Helston Garages sale. But obviously, from yourself, in terms of that acquisition, and obviously what you decided to do in terms of the addition and of the brands that you all represent and new brands that you don't represent as well.
Yeah, well, we're obviously aware of the business. My chairman, Andy Goss, knew the family, and obviously it was quite unfortunate that closing stages of the previous year and early stages of the last year, the 2 owners, who were a married couple, actually passed away in fairly quick succession, which then obviously led to a strategic review. And we expressed an interest. A number of our manufacturer partners contacted us as well and said we were interested. In fairness, we'd already sort of made contact. And then there was a process run through, which we were fortunate enough to be successful in. It was an acquisition we did want to do for geographical reasons and franchise reasons. And I think we've been highlighting that with a very conservative balance sheet, we wanted to undertake a significant transaction. And in reality, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've looked at all kinds of different permutations of scaled transaction. And actually, when it came down to it, it is a very important acquisition for us, and it's certainly our largest acquisition we've done to date. But we never actually use the word transformational, because actually, if you look in terms of scale, it added 28 outlets to what we already had to give us 192, and with 4 billion turnover, and this gave us another 500 or 600 million. So it probably wasn't transformational in the truest sense. The word transformational is you've got 160 dealerships and you get another 160 dealerships. But that doesn't mean it's not important. And the entire focus of our business over the next 6 months will be on integrating, rebranding, the Helston business. Actually, I think we start today. I think the Peugeot dealerships are in the process. I think they're about to flick the switch to our systems and Bristol Street Motors branding, etc., etc. And then over the next 4 months, everything will pretty well follow suit.
And with this, last time we were on the podcast, we talked about targets and things like this and chase to be positioned, but and you, as you say, it's just whatever opportunities present themselves, etc. But does this then take you in terms of the third largest group in terms of revenue? Is that correct in terms of that?
We suspect it does, but it's difficult to get visibility on what everybody else is doing, isn't it? And remember that a lot of the players in the top 10 aren't quoted UK companies. So actually, the visibility is not great, but I suspect it does in reality.
Yeah. And that's the thing with it, isn't it? I mean, it's like you say, it's strategically in terms of that geographic coverage across that southwest. Is that a very key move for you in terms of that?
Yeah, it is. I mean, if you think about the Virtue brand, which is the premium brand, we're very strong in the northeast. We're very strong in Yorkshire. We're strong in the East Midlands. We've got an outpost in Hereford. And then that's it. So that explains really why only 8% of the UK population have actually heard of Virtue, whereas it's 54% in terms of Bristol Street Motors. So to go and take a whole territory from Land's End to broadly Salisbury Plain and saturate it with Virtue Motors dealerships where we can have TV marketing, extra chief sponsorship, etc., will grow brand awareness, will make Virtue Motors the biggest brand, and will, I think, be good for us.
And Robert, in terms of the acquisition, you've obviously managed a number of acquisitions over the years now. I'm just wondering how complicated this one was, because there were two other vendors involved, with Yeomans buying the VW Group side of the Helston business and Rybrook buying the Porsche business. So did that make it more complicated than...
I think this was the single most complicated transaction ever in the history of motor retail. I think if you ask David Kendrick, he'd definitely think that. I mean, to be honest, it pushed my intellectual prowess to the edge from an accounting perspective to actually work out the structure of a deal. Bear in mind that we bought the business based on the August balance sheet, and then ended up pre-selling 10 or 11 dealerships in two separate transactions 2 months later. I mean, I think about a month before the deal, I sat in a darkened room and convinced myself that the structure didn't work, and it didn't. So I had to persuade everybody I was right. So it was really quite complicated, actually, in terms of how to actually structure it. Now, there were a lot of willing parties. I have to say, Yeomans were good to deal with, Rybrook were good to deal with, the Helston management were good to deal with. There was a willingness of all parties. And actually, if one party hadn't been willing, in the most complicated transaction I've ever seen, it would never have gone.
Yeah.
There was a lot of pieces had to be put in place.
Well, that's a great little teaser, isn't it, Philip, for the full interview, which is available on your podcast feed right now, and it's attracted a lot of interest. I noticed we've had quite a few downloads on that episode already.
Yes, and it is again sort of very early on in the new year there with Robert sharing his view on a few things, and very relaxed interview there with Robert as always, and he likes to have a chat with us and talk through things, and he's obviously got a clear plan for the 2023. I suppose it's just hard work now in terms of pulling it off. But no, he did, as you can tell there with the snippet that you just listened to. He really enjoyed that interview, and I say, go back onto your podcast feed to listen to the full interview.
Yeah, and there was a couple of points that stood out for me during the interview, because he mentioned about the acquisition, which was, after all, the biggest acquisition of last year, the Helston Garages acquisition. But he didn't describe it as transformational, did he? Because he made the point that he's added 21 locations to the business, but Virtue Motors is now of a scale where adding 22 locations is no longer transformational. That is the size of the business, and it has grown rapidly
Yes.
over years and certainly recent years. And also interesting that he thinks they'll be profit enhancing pretty much from the get-go. And as a spoiler alert, he does actually talk about taking on some additional motorbike franchises, which he goes into a bit more detail in the full interview.
Yeah. So he's obviously on that growth plan, looking for opportunities where they're available. And let's say, it's quite interesting on some of his remarks there. So we won't spoil it all for you. So do listen to the full headlines, the full interview there with Robert. And what have we got in the headlines this week then, Curtis?
So headlines this week are from AM Online, Car Dealer, Auto Retail Agenda and Automotive News Europe, starting with average used car prices finished the year just £91 cheaper than they started back in January 2022. Property giant Savills enters dealer property sector with APC takeover. Why the global auto sector faces a critical year. We've got the latest on Pendragon and Pinewood, and we've got some people news with a senior appointment and a departure at two major dealer groups.
We have. So, I say we're heading over first to an exclusive there with eBay Motors Group, and it's talking about, obviously, as Curtis said there, that the average used car price only finished £91 cheaper than they started off in January of 2022. So we all know how strong the year got going in terms of used trade values and the retail prices. And we know it got a little bit tougher in the sort of the fourth quarter, but to only be finished the year £91 down shows how strong that market retained all the way through the year, doesn't it?
Yeah, there were fluctuations along the way, but the prices started back in January this time last year at £18,155, and they finished in December at £18,064. So it's a drop of just 0.5%, or as we say, £91. It's worth pointing out that £18,000. It has been fairly stable over the course of the year, despite those slight fluctuations. But that's still at a very high level, certainly when you start comparing with pre-COVID levels.
Yeah, and they talk about older and cheaper cars proved popular with the buyers over the last 18 months, with significant rises in searches on the motors.co.uk website there. But views for cars priced under £5,000 and those in the £5,000 to £10,000 bracket jumped 20% in that time, while online views of cars priced £10,000 to £20,000 actually dropped by 19%. So showing kind of where that demand is now at the price of vehicles.
Yeah, and the market view looks very much at the trends over the course of the year. And it does point out that despite the impact of high prices and reduced consumer confidence, the time between cars being listed and sold actually remained pretty stable throughout the year. So average days to sell in December reduced across all dealer sectors year on year from 41 to 39 days year on year, while stock levels actually rose from 53 to 59 units. And interesting comment here from Phil Jones, Chief Operating Officer at eBay Motors Group, who was also a recent guest on the show. He says, used cars are significantly more expensive than they were, with our data showing an average rise of £3,500 in the last 18 months. And as a result, an affordability gap has emerged, with younger profile cars now out of reach for many buyers, which has pushed more eyeballs to older and cheaper cars, especially those with full service histories, which is a point he actually made on the show, didn't he?
Yeah, it is key, and I think Andy Condy said the same. That it is about that sort of that condition, history, etc., ownership, the basics that we all kind of know and forget about sometimes. But as always, the market view will be available on the eBay Motors website, and all the detail, a lot more detail than Curtis and I have just talked through there briefly on that market view, giving you a lot more insight into the activity of fuel types, model types, etc., on based on search criteria. So please do head over to that to get more details on it.
Next headline is from AM Online, and it is property giant Savills enters dealer property sector with APC takeover. So this is another acquisition, but we don't often hear about acquisitions in the property market. But particularly interesting one here because APC it's been around since 2005, set up by Bill Becks, and actually after he moved on from Stratton Parker's Motor Trade Property Agency, and APC has built a client base of dealer groups, car manufacturers, and financial institutions over the years. And he highlights that the property trends that dealer groups have had to overcome, such as this fierce competition from housing developers and the steady rise of multi-franchising. But this is significant because APC, a big business within the motor trade, is now part of an even bigger property portfolio at Savills.
Yeah, I mean that obviously giving them significant power in that marketplace, and they do talk about APC being involved with many sales of properties occupied by Tesla, Pendragon, Virtue Motors, Renault, etc. amongst many others, and they say there it's a big operation. Savills, I mean they're very big definitely very big in the business sector, aren't they?
Yes.
Savills. I'm not sure how big they are within the consumer property market, but I know for sure they're very big in the business sector.
Yeah, very much in the commercial side of the property market, and good to see that the 6-strong APC team will actually be forming a new automotive service within Savills. And this will provide agency, investment, valuation, consultancy, and lease advisory work to clients across the UK.
No, it'd be. I do receive the APC newsletter actually on a regular basis, but
they are those newsletters are very good, and certainly back in the day at Motor Trade, we used them a lot. It was a good source of information about what trends are going on in the property market.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed. Next up is our latest Menable Moment, looking at mental health and well-being awareness, issues and best practices across the automotive sector, with me, Stephen Whitton.
Yeah, hi guys, time for another Menable Moments. Wow, that was a bit weird, being introduced by myself. Anyway, Happy New Year to everyone. I'm not sure when you're meant to stop saying that, but it's the first time I've had a chance to say it to you all. But so, yeah, Happy New Year. A little bit croaky this morning. I'm still recovering from yet another bloody cold that I've just seemed to can't not shift. I had a fantastic week away in the sun last week, and it just, I don't know, it's made it worse. So anyway, we will battle on. How are you doing with your New Year's resolutions? I saw something fantastic on LinkedIn last week that said New Year's resolutions are nothing more than actually a to-do list for the first week of January. And I thought, how true is that? I think we've all been there. But so how are you doing? I made a New Year's resolution, actually, and that is to do what brings me joy. So joy is what I want to talk about today. And I'm not talking about my elderly aunt that lives in Essex. Although, if you're listening, Auntie Joy, hello. I very much doubt that she is, but anyway. Let's think about joy a little bit. And I've been out trying to sort of spread a little joy, really, and rev people up and do stuff that just injects a bit of fun and a bit of humour and a bit of lightheartedness back into things, because, boy, don't we need it. Not only is it January and it's a bit miserable, and obviously next week is meant to be the most miserable week of the year, isn't it? But just, all the predictions for this year, and when you listen to the news and all the rest of it, there's lots and lots of reasons to be despondent and uptight about what's happening and so on. So I'm on a bit of a mission to spread a bit of joy and to let's do what we can to just have a bit of fun and help people out. continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with each other, because, it's very easy for me to say, oh, spread a little joy, and that's because I'm in a fairly decent place, but I totally accept and understand that that's not the case for everyone. So let's not be glib about it, but let's be truthful and honest and make a commitment to do what we can to make lives happy for people and joyful. So whatever that might be, and unashamedly, I am going to plug the fact that I am now doing a few workshops and a few talks where it's joyous. And why shouldn't mental health be joyous? We've gone through a whole period of accepting and acknowledging and being aware of mental health, but it doesn't have to be a dull, boring, uninteresting, and, dare I say, kind of depressing subject. It is something that we can inject a little fun and humour and lightheartedness into, and just get people feeling a bit joyous again. After all, don't forget, people do perform well when they feel good about themselves. And despite me feeling a bit rough right now, and apologies for the croaky voice, I'm actually feeling like I'm on fire, and I can't help but think that a big part of that is having made the commitment to just do what gives me joy and not get bogged down in stuff that doesn't, quite frankly. So anyway, as always, you know how to get hold of me, stephen.witten@menable.org, or through any of the social channels. LinkedIn particularly, you may have found me on there occasionally. And I will look forward even to catching up with you again soon. Take care, guys, and we will speak anon. Take it easy.
Well, as always, I think he was always trying to work out that introducing himself there, Curtis.
Yes, yeah.
But
it was seamless.
Pardon? It was seamless, yes.
It was seamless.
Yes. So again, I mean, they're with Steve talking about doing what makes you happy. And, as Curtis alluded to right at the start of the show, and when you met with Steve this week, and there was actually a few little snippets on social media from the keynote speaking conference that he was doing there, and they were talking about fences and fairy cakes, which that's the way that Steve works. And if you do get onto social media and you do see the little video that he shared from his conference there, but there's on stage or up front there is some ladies and gentlemen on stage there, and they were talking about a few things and then asking them to reference, and the one of the ladies said mansplaining, of which all the women burst out laughing, knew exactly what it meant, whereas all the men looked a little bit bewildered as to didn't quite understand what was meant by mansplaining. So it did get them in a bit of an uproar, that one on the thing. So if you haven't seen it, then I would check out Steve's social feed, and you'll see a little snippet of that video on his social feed.
Yes, and ever as always, if you want to talk to Steve about how you can get involved in Menable, or if you need him for any management training, then do email him at stephen.witten@menable.org, and that's Stephen with a PH. You can also find him on LinkedIn and Twitter.
You can. So continuing with the headlines there, we're heading back over to Car Dealer. And this is an exclusive that they shared this week. And Car Dealer Group Pendragon facing a 260 million claim in High Court battle. And this is a battle over Pinewood technology, cited as the reason why Heading Deal fell through. And that the legal case has been rumbling in since last summer, but was not announced to the stock market. And Car Dealer are stating that they've had one expert tell Car Dealer this would have caused Heading serious concerns. And Pendragon have actually refused to comment on it because it is a live litigation. So this is quite a detailed report here from Car Dealer.
It is, and it's worth heading over to Car Dealer to read it in full. And it's worth also adding that Headin had been approached for a comment as well. But there is an interesting comment from Paul Daly, who's automotive partner at UHY Hackey Young, because he said the claim for a substantial sum would have come out in the due diligence process. And he goes on to say this is clearly a large claim and could credibly have caused the deal to fall over. That's clear cut to me. So, as I say, there's lots more detail in this particular story, and we're likely to hear more from this story over the coming weeks. But do check out Car Dealer for the full lowdown.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
The next headline is from Automotive News Europe, and it is why the global auto sector faces a critical year. So this is an interesting one, Phil, and I know you had quite a bit of input into this story, but it's really looking at the impact of this lost production, which is something we talk about quite regularly on the podcast. So the headline figure is there's 46 million new vehicles that have been lost over the last 3 years. And in the piece, I was interested to see that there's a loss of around, well, it's just under 11 million new registrations in the top 5 European markets alone. So what actually prompted this particular story?
I think what we're trying to, because we get asked the question all the time as to, and there'll be those listening to the podcast that may have asked the question or have been asked the question themselves, that when will the market return to normality? As if there's a normality to return to.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of saying, do you know what? We've lost this volume of production vehicles over the last 3 years. We're not back to full production recovery, and we won't be back to full production recovery for some years. So this impact of lost production, lost registrations, and as you say, just short of 11 million there in just the top 5 European markets, including the UK. And I think it's 2.6 million in the UK. Those registrations have gone. They're not coming back. They're going to impact the used vehicle marketplace. And trying to say that, the year that we're entering now in terms of 2023 and beyond, we've got this challenges of shortage of new vehicle supply that's now starting to pick up. We know production is starting to recover. It started at the back end of last year. It's going to have a significant impact on the used vehicle park for years to come. Those vehicles will never went into the market in new and will never return as a used car. But at the same time, we're also tackling this transition to electrification. And you and I have spoken many times on the podcast, obviously, about the EVs, mainly dominated by the new entrants in terms of the Chinese brands and the volume of export coming out of China. And the market's got to think about how they're going to tackle this. And in addition to that, you're then looking at this agency model and what that means for the sector and what changes that will make. So when people say is when we will return to normality in a pre-pandemic, in a post-pandemic world, never.
Yeah,
it's changed. It's changed permanently.
Yeah, that's the absolute key, isn't it? Because the sector has moved on. Anyone looking for normality, well, it'll be a new normality when it arrives, won't it? It won't. We won't be going back to the way it was.
Yeah. I mean, even to the point of the as we talk about every time we get the new vehicle registration data from the SMMT, the increase in electric vehicles in terms of market share that equates to the loss of petrol diesel, although petrol diesel is still in demand in terms of the market, in terms of consumers and etc. So the whole dynamics are changing, and they're changing rapidly. And whether you're a solution provider, a retailer, whoever you are within the industry, there's a lot to think about going ahead now. Just 2023 and beyond, around all these different dynamics that are taking place. And we're just trying to call out some of that. And in fairness, when it went to the press, the reactions were, was great. Yeah, this is what is really happening. This is what we need to start to think about. This is what that's sort of hitting the market. So that was really what instigated the press release there.
Yeah, and just returning briefly to this question of new car supply, the anecdotal evidence seems to be that it is improving. It's not nowhere near as strong as it was, but it is improving year on year. And indeed, talking to Robert Forrester in our interview, he said you can actually go through a number of manufacturers, and he listed some, and he said, "Yep, that's better than it was last year. That's better than it was last year." And this is kind of what you're hearing as well, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it is. It's not a whole recovery, as many manufacturers have gone into the lockdown and the shortage of production and found that they can be more profitable through lower volumes. They may not, and strategically, focused on not returning to higher volumes, and they may stay that way. Although there'll be those shouting at the podcast this morning saying, "Yeah, how many times have we heard that?"
Yeah,
We talk
yeah,
about a push-pull marketplace. What is that going to look like? But as Robert said, it's now down to each manufacturer. What are their
yes.
strategic plans? Their production is up, theirs isn't, theirs will never be pre-pandemic levels, they will be. And that's the thing now. And we talk about these Chinese brands, the new entrances and etc., but they may start to, fill those gaps in the market that other manufacturers either can't recover or don't want to recover to the pre-pandemic volumes that they had previously.
Yeah, and I'll say it's rather new, Phil. It is an interesting piece, and I do urge listeners to head over to Automotive News Europe to check that out, because it goes into some detail about those supply shortages, the EVs coming from China, and agencies. So there's some interesting comments there.
Yeah. And moving on from that, we've got a little bit of people news that's hit the headlines this week. And these are significant people news, aren't they, Curtis? And the first one is there in Car Dealer magazine, and new CEO at Harwood's Group confirmed as former Volvo Cars UK boss, John Wakefield. So this is significant moves now, isn't it?
It is, yeah, particularly interesting one, and a lot of listeners will be familiar with the name John Wakefield, and many listeners will actually know him from his days running Volvo UK. So, as part of this announcement, the Wakefield has also appointed two non-execs who have joined the board. So that's William Fall and also former Benfield boss Mark Squires. And Mark will definitely be known to a lot of
Yes.
listeners. So they've both joined the group as non-execs, whilst former CEO Archie Harwood will actually remain with the group, but he takes on the role of Chief Transformation Officer. So, yeah, a lot happening there at Harwood's. And, just by way of a little background, Harwood's run dealerships across Hampshire, Surrey, Sussex, and Kent. So, very much my end of the country this week, Phil.
That's your territory. We've moved down your way, haven't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we moved down to the beautiful south, but it's a family-run business. I mean, it's been going since the 1930s and represents the likes of Audi, Jaguar Land Rover, McLaren, and Aston Martin. So it's great to see John Wakefield back in the UK.
Yeah, fantastic news there, and fairly early on in the year, this move as well. You do sometimes get that, don't you? Early on, that these moves start to happen
Yeah.
in the industry. And the final story of this week, we're heading over to Auto Retail Agenda, and this is the news this week that brought that Richard Blumberger leaves Marshalls. Now, he was the appointment by Dash Gupta and as of Marshalls, and he's left this week. And Blumberger was appointed by, as I say, Dash Gupta and the Marshall board back in 2018, and he replaced Mark Rayban, who moved to the Lookers role of CEO back in January of 2019. So this is a big move into it, and a shift there for Marshalls.
Yeah, definitely. And we had Richard on the podcast a couple of times when we were talking to him and Dash about interims and year ends. Yeah, Richard's background very much in the PLC world. The piece says that he's taken a job outside of auto retail, and I guess that's not really a surprise. And I'm sure it will be somewhere in the PLC world.
Yeah, I think he is definitely a PLC man, and like I say, he didn't come from automotive, did he? I think he was from outside automotive, and like I say, obviously the Motorline results back in March 2020 signed off by Bloomberg in December had been released, and so he's done some significant work with that Marshalls and the profitability and results for the Marshalls group. And like I say, we'll see what does happen after that moving forward. It's quite funny this week where if anybody does obviously follow Pete Waddell of Big Motoring World in the social space, he did put a comment out on this story to say that the respect that he had for Dash and anybody that worked for Dash within the Marshalls group, and if they did want a job, then to send their CV to Pete Waddell, and he'll certainly take them on now. And I think there was a comment with Dash. I think Dash said he was going to put his CV into Pete Waddell as well. So it got a little bit of a amusement there in the social space on the back of this announcement this week.
Yeah, that's great. And talking of Dash, I did notice a couple of weeks ago that he just posted it was a photograph on WhatsApp, and I think it said halfway, and he just left it at that. So halfway through tending his garden, and he did point out that he hasn't got any roses in his garden, but I guess he'll be cutting the grass in a couple of months' time.
I remember a certain John O'Hanlon who left the industry for a while, and I think he was advised by his partner to go back to work. But it wasn't a gardener.
And whatever happened to John O'Hanlon?
Exactly. So, I mean, that's a roundup of this week's headlines. I say, hope you enjoyed the new voiceovers, the new jingles there from our friend Steve Whitten, and these Menable moments there at the halfway point. And as we said right at the start there, to advise you, if you've not listened to the full interview there with Robert Forrester, do head over to your podcast feed. It was released Thursday of this week. Have a listen to that. Very insightful, very informative, and gives you a snippet of the direction that Virtue are heading in for 2023 as he works through his priority to-do list. Not a New Year's resolution, he said, but his to-do list. So do tune in for that.
But that's all from us. You've been listening to the weekly Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for joining us for all the chatter that matters. So it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
You've been listening to Motor Trade Radio podcast, sponsored by eBay Motors Group. We'll be sharing all the links from this week's headlines on Monday morning. So to make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.